we're living in strange times. We're living in a time that the only way I know how to describe it, it's like a moral free fall. It's like someone jumps out of an airplane without a parachute. As we watch our culture changing rapidly and radically, moving from one level of degradation to another in ways that when I was younger I couldn't imagine. And when that's going on, Christians face new temptations. I don't mean that sin is anything new. I don't mean that other believers haven't lived in culture similar to ours or even worse than ours. I just mean that as the culture experiences this moral free fall, and especially as the culture begins to infect the church to some degree, we're going to face some new temptations. One of the things that happens in a culture like ours is no longer is there a belief in anything except that we all have the right to believe anything. I have the right to believe what I believe. You have the right to believe what you believe. We can all come up with what our own view of things is, and no one has the right to judge anyone else. I heard Cam Newton the other night being interviewed after he kind of had a meltdown in his interview right after the Super Bowl. He played the poor sport, and someone was asking him about it, and he was defensive about it, and he was unapologetic about it, and I couldn't help but pick up on one of his statements. He says, well, what makes them right? I mean, the people who criticize me and say that I shouldn't be a poor sport and I should have handled it differently and someone else would have handled it differently. I mean, what makes them right? And I thought to myself, well, Cam, what makes anything right? I mean, what are the standards by which we're measuring any kind of behavior? I understand where he's coming from because this is the world he's living in right now. There's really nothing that you can count on as being right or wrong except what each and every individual comes up with. Of course, saying, as long as we don't hurt anybody else, but then we get to define what that means too. And in a world like that, what ends up happening is everyone starts to give free passes to everyone else. A live and let live attitude sets in. So I'm going to do what I do, you do what you do, you don't judge me, I don't judge you. And in that world, what begins to happen, not with the same kind of spirit, a different spirit, but Christians begin to get a free pass also. As professing believers begin to abandon virtues that once characterized the Christian faith, as the church becomes more and more compromised and unfaithful, the culture begins to give a free pass even to believers. Now, not in the same spirit as I said. Lost people celebrate the amoral condition of the culture, but in the case of Christians, it's with a cynical attitude. You're like us? Well, we wouldn't expect any different. We hear what you say, we hear what you profess, but you know what? Here's what we understand. People are people. Some choose to be religious, some choose to be irreligious, but people are people. So when you're like us, it doesn't surprise us. We've always thought of you as being just like us. No one is really any different. You just happen to find some comfort in your religion. We don't need that. So I'm not surprised when you're like us. You abandon the things you say you believe in order to get ahead in business. Doesn't surprise us. We've always thought you're just like us. You divorce your wife or your husband. Doesn't surprise us. We've always thought you're just like us. And so these free passes begin to be given out, but with an attitude, a spirit of cynicism. There was a time, I can remember a time when even among lost people, Christians were held to a high standard. It wasn't just Christians holding Christians to a high standard. The lost world held Christians to a high standard. And sometimes that was unfair, and sometimes it was unrealistic, but it was healthy for us. Served to prick our collective conscience. It sort of kept us awake to the idea of our high calling in this world. And so the danger we face as the culture slides into this moral ditch and even begins to give free passes to Christians, the danger we face is that we can abandon Christian virtue without much notice. And as the world infects the church more and more, we may not even be held accountable in the church. Even in the churches, we just decide to live and let live. And then in the culture, there's no pressure upon us there either. It's a dangerous situation. The only thing that can keep us on the right path is our commitment to Christ and our commitment to His Word. We must not abandon virtue, not in its natural expressions. You realize virtue has both natural and supernatural expressions. There's sort of a natural expression of virtue that's just the result of the image of God in man. That's why you can have lost people stopping to help someone fix a tire or rush into a burning building to save somebody. You still see the echoes of how God made us in His image. So there's sort of a natural expression of virtue. Then there are those supernatural expressions that can only be explained by our salvation in Christ. We must be a people who don't abandon virtue, not in any form or fashion.